summer day, and this is a true story.
You guys ever thought about joining a sorority?
I promise to let any of my senior sisters.
I promise to let any of my senior sisters
Into my bed whenever they want.
Do you have this diary?
Yes. But your mom wants to.
You must be Summer Smith. I've heard so much about you. She wants me to be right. She put a
I'm on need. And you choose to.
Would you be Elsa's sister? Not something else. Let's go. You stood up to your mom and it was just so what did you say?
I like the legend.
I don't think a legend, but my friend is coming from background. Her mom passed away
A while ago, and it's been our mentor for our thing. They only have one bed, so obviously Violet's gonna stay with me, and Jenna, you can stay with Taylor.
Scene 2 of this anthology shifts the focus from the pledge's initiation into sorority life toward a much more complicated encounter involving Summer's mother and the women who now surround her daughter. The scene begins with the sorority president Ryan welcoming Summer's mother into the house with an almost exaggerated display of friendliness. The conversation initially sounds ordinary, with Ryan assuring her that the girls are excited about joining and joking about the quality of the food. Yet the pleasant surface quickly gives way to something far more invasive when Ryan reveals that Summer has shared deeply personal information about her mother's private life. What follows is less a simple confrontation than a collision between generations, privacy, sexuality, and the strange ways communities can become intimate while simultaneously violating boundaries. Ryan produces the diary that Summer discovered, and the mother immediately recognizes that information from her private life has traveled far beyond the family home. The revelation concerns her relationship with Roberta, a woman who became emotionally important to her and ultimately influenced her decision to leave her marriage. The mother is furious and embarrassed, but beneath her anger is another emotion, the pain of realizing that something she had kept private has been transformed into communal knowledge. Summer, meanwhile, is not present to mediate the disclosure, which makes the scene particularly uncomfortable because the sorority has effectively turned a family secret into an object of investigation. From a queer perspective, this is important, because the story connects sexual identity with privacy and the unequal burden placed on women who have relationships outside conventional expectations. The mother explains that she could not deny herself forever, suggesting that her relationship with another woman represented a part of her identity that had become impossible to suppress. Her explanation is not presented as a simple rebellion against marriage. Instead, it suggests a woman reaching a point where remaining within an expected role has become emotionally unsustainable. That tension can resonate with queer women who have spent years attempting to inhabit identities that made sense to their families or communities while leaving parts of themselves unspoken. The mother's situation also complicates the idea of coming out. She has apparently made a choice in her personal life, but she has not necessarily chosen to make every detail of that life public. Her daughter's discovery and subsequent disclosure demonstrate that visibility can be double-edged. Recognition can be liberating when it happens on one's own terms, but exposure can feel violating when someone else controls the timing and context. Ryan's role intensifies this problem because she treats private information as material for sorority administration. Her declaration that she is responsible for researching the women entering the house establishes a culture in which surveillance is disguised as sisterhood. The sorority claims to create belonging, yet it also demands information, conformity, secrecy, and obedience. This contradiction becomes one of the scene's central themes. Women are promised community, but membership can require surrendering parts of oneself to the group. That dynamic has particular significance for queer women, who have historically had to navigate spaces where community can provide safety while also creating pressure to explain or perform identity. The mother's anger therefore operates on several levels. She is angry at Summer for reading and sharing her diary, angry at Ryan for weaponizing it, and perhaps angry at herself for having left such a vulnerable record where it could be discovered. Her statement that she should not have written anything down captures a familiar fear surrounding queer self-expression, the worry that private words can become evidence against the person who wrote them. Diaries, letters, photographs, and personal memories can function as tools of self-recognition, but they can also become dangerous when privacy is removed. The scene asks viewers to consider who gets to own a woman's story. Ryan believes institutional authority gives her permission to know everything about the women entering her organization. Summer believes discovering her mother's secret gives her a right to discuss it. The mother insists implicitly and explicitly that her life belongs to her. None of these positions are entirely compatible, and that friction gives the scene its emotional weight. The conversation also challenges simplistic ideas about what queer visibility means. The mother does not need to become a symbol or representative of lesbian identity. She is simply a woman whose life became more complicated than the expectations surrounding her. Her attraction to Roberta exists alongside motherhood, marriage, family conflict, embarrassment, and regret. This makes her more interesting than a conventional coming-out storyline because the narrative allows her sexuality to be connected to the broader question of authenticity. She chose a life that felt more truthful, but that truth created consequences for people around her. Importantly, the scene does not require the audience to decide that every consequence was justified. Instead, it shows that authenticity can be emotionally difficult even when it is necessary. Elsa's presence adds another layer because the younger women are themselves being watched and evaluated. Ryan references Elsa's behavior and personal information as though the sorority has a right to catalog the pledges' lives. The younger women, therefore, occupy a world in which identity is constantly being interpreted by others. They are told that sisterhood means trust, but the structure around them repeatedly demonstrates that trust can be conditional. The mother and the pledges are connected by this shared vulnerability. Both generations are confronted with institutions or people who believe they can define what women are allowed to keep private. After Ryan leaves the mother and Elsa together, the atmosphere changes. The earlier confrontation gives way to something quieter and more emotionally attentive. Elsa apologizes for the situation and makes clear that she did not intend to become involved in the mother's private life. The mother responds with embarrassment, but the conversation gradually moves toward mutual understanding. This transition is significant because it separates genuine connection from the invasive behavior that preceded it. Ryan's version of intimacy is managerial and controlling. Elsa's is based on listening, reassurance, and recognition. The distinction matters because queer communities have often had to build forms of chosen family precisely because conventional institutions did not provide safe spaces for honest emotional expression. Elsa becomes, however briefly, someone who can witness the mother without reducing her to a secret. The mother's vulnerability also reveals how much emotional labor women are expected to perform. She must explain why she left her husband, defend her choices, manage her daughter's feelings, and navigate the humiliation of having her diary exposed. At the same time, she remains conscious of how she appears to younger women. Her embarrassment is not simply about sexuality, it is about losing control of her own narrative. Many women can recognize that feeling even outside queer experience. Society often encourages women to be transparent enough to seem trustworthy, while simultaneously punishing them when their private emotions become visible. The contradiction is especially intense for women whose relationships do not fit conventional expectations. The scene also uses age difference in an interesting way. The mother is older and has already experienced marriage, parenthood, and the consequences of making difficult choices. Elsa belongs to a younger generation that is still discovering how adult identity works. Their conversation therefore becomes a meeting between two forms of uncertainty. Elsa may be learning what she wants from relationships and belonging, while the mother is learning how to live honestly after years of suppressing or compartmentalizing parts of herself. Neither woman is portrayed as having complete certainty. That uncertainty makes their interaction more human. The film also complicates the idea of mentorship. In a healthier version of sorority life, an older or more experienced woman might help a younger woman navigate school, relationships, and identity. Here, that structure is distorted by power. Ryan assigns roles without meaningful consent and treats personal information as organizational property. The mother's encounter with Elsa consequently suggests an alternative model of female connection, one based less on hierarchy and more on empathy. That contrast becomes particularly resonant within lesbian and queer contexts, where mentorship can be deeply meaningful but can also become complicated by age, authority, admiration, or emotional dependency. Healthy connection requires attention to boundaries precisely because intense recognition can arise quickly when someone finally feels understood. The scene's emotional center arrives when the mother admits that she wants to feel better and Elsa responds with care. The moment is not most interesting as a romantic development. It is interesting because the mother, who has spent the scene being exposed and judged, is finally treated as a person rather than a scandal. Elsa listens. She notices the mother's distress. She offers comfort. The gestures matter because they restore dignity after the earlier humiliation. This is where the film's queer themes can be understood most productively. Lesbian and queer stories are often framed around revelation, confession, or dramatic discovery, but the deeper experience can be much quieter. The relief of being seen without being interrogated. The mother's attraction to women is not the only thing that defines her. She is also lonely, conflicted, protective, embarrassed, resilient, and capable of beginning again. The scene therefore presents queerness as part of a whole emotional life rather than a single plot twist. The interaction also invites a broader reading of women's relationships with one another. Women are frequently encouraged to provide emotional support, yet they are not always encouraged to examine the boundaries surrounding that support. Care can become obligation, and intimacy can become surveillance. The sorority exaggerates this tension by presenting itself as a family while demanding access to private information. Chosen families should ideally provide refuge from such pressure, not reproduce it. The scene asks what happens when sisterhood becomes conditional on disclosure. For queer viewers, that question can carry particular force because many people have experienced the difference between being welcomed and being examined. Being welcomed means having room to define oneself. Being examined means having others decide what one's identity means before one has finished deciding it oneself. The mother's story embodies the first step toward reclaiming that authority. She cannot undo what has been revealed, but she can refuse to let other people determine the meaning of her choices. Her declaration that she could not deny herself becomes the scene's clearest statement of self-recognition. It does not erase the hurt caused by her decisions, nor does it excuse every consequence, but it establishes a principle. A person cannot indefinitely live against her own emotional reality without paying a price. That idea extends beyond sexuality. Women of many backgrounds can recognize the exhaustion of maintaining an identity designed primarily to satisfy other people. The mother's journey therefore becomes part of the anthology's larger interest in women becoming visible to themselves. The scene also critiques the cultural tendency to sensationalize lesbian relationships. The most provocative details in the dialogue are not necessary to understand the emotional stakes. What matters is that the mother loved someone, made a difficult choice, and now has to confront the consequences of having that love exposed. By focusing on those emotional dimensions, the story can be read as resisting the idea that women loving women exists merely to shock or entertain. Instead, the relationship becomes a vehicle for discussing honesty, loneliness, family, and the complicated freedom of choosing a life that feels authentic. At the same time, the scene does not completely escape the problems it depicts. The sorority's treatment of privacy is invasive, and the assignment of intimate relationships through institutional authority raises serious questions about consent and autonomy. The film can therefore be appreciated more critically by recognizing the difference between its potentially meaningful queer themes and the unhealthy structures surrounding them. Queer representation becomes more compelling when women are allowed to make choices freely, rather than having those choices engineered by a hierarchy. This distinction is especially important because lesbian relationships have historically been interpreted through the fantasies and expectations of outsiders. A genuinely emotionally grounded story should allow women to possess interiority that cannot be reduced to someone else's curiosity. Here, the strongest moments occur when the characters move beyond spectacle and begin speaking honestly about loneliness, disappointment, embarrassment, and the desire to be understood. The mother and Elsa briefly create a space where those feelings can exist without needing to be translated into a performance for the sorority. That space resembles the ideal of chosen family. Not a place where everyone knows everything about everyone else, but a place where people can reveal themselves gradually and safely. Ultimately, Scene 2 is about the collision between privacy and visibility, and about the difference between being known and being exposed. Summer's discovery of her mother's diary begins the conflict, Ryan's institutional authority magnifies it, and Elsa's empathy offers a quieter alternative. The mother's queer identity is important, but the deeper subject is her right to define what that identity means within the context of her entire life. Her relationship history cannot be separated from family, responsibility, regret, or courage. Yet none of those elements cancel the legitimacy of her feelings. Elsa likewise demonstrates that younger women can become important witnesses to older women's lives without turning them into objects of judgment. Their interaction suggests that queer recognition can cross generations when it is grounded in compassion rather than curiosity. For LGBTQ+ viewers, this can be a meaningful distinction. Representation does not have to be perfect to raise valuable questions, and this scene raises many. Who owns a woman's story? When does sisterhood become surveillance? How can women support one another without consuming one another's privacy? What does authenticity cost when a person has spent years adapting to expectations? And how can chosen family become a place of genuine refuge instead of another institution demanding obedience? The scene never offers simple answers, but its emotional trajectory points toward one. Women need spaces where they can be honest without surrendering control over themselves. The mother's journey is therefore not merely a story about discovering or revealing lesbian identity. It is a story about reclaiming authorship over a life that other people have started narrating for her. That makes the scene significant within a queer anthology, because the most powerful form of visibility is not exposure. It is self-definition. Lesbian and queer women deserve stories in which their feelings are treated as meaningful human experiences, not mysteries waiting for someone else to solve. Scene 2 moves imperfectly through that terrain, but its most thoughtful moments insist on the importance of empathy, privacy, and emotional truth. In the end, the mother's greatest act of resilience is simply refusing to deny herself, while Elsa's most meaningful contribution is recognizing her as a person rather than a secret. Together, these ideas form the message. Authenticity is not exposure, and love between women is strongest when women decide how stories are shared.